The cold was a constant companion, a lover more faithful than any I could ever hope for. It seeped through the threadbare wool of my servant's tunic, settled deep in my bones, and turned my heart into a shard of ice I was certain would never thaw. Here, in the cavernous great hall of the Black Moon Pack, the roaring hearths did little to touch the chill that was uniquely mine. It was a cold born of isolation, a frost that had begun the day Lord Valerius, my supposed mate, had looked upon my white hair and pale, pink-tinged eyes and declared me a curse. My name was Lysandra. In a world of rich earth tones, of wolves the color of shadow and soil and autumn leaves, I was a mistake of the moon goddess, an albino, a ghost. My wolf form was small, frail, and as white as the snow that now blanketed the lands, a beacon of weakness in a culture that prized strength above all else. I was an omega, the lowest of the low, and my unfortunate coloring ensured I would never be overlooked enough to find peace in my lowly station. I was a spectacle of shame. Tonight, the hall was suffocatingly full. Banners depicting the Black Moon crest, a snarling wolf's head against a fractured moon hung from the high rafters, their dark colors a stark contrast to my own pallor. The long tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, glistening fruits, and endless flagons of wine. It was the annual gathering of the packs, a tense political affair disguised as a celebration. Alphas from a dozen territories were here, their power a palpable pressure in the air that made the omega in me want to curl into a ball and disappear. My duty was simple, yet it filled me with a familiar, stomach-churning dread. I was to pour wine. I had to move among them, these powerful, perfect beings, and feel the heat of their contemptuous stares. I kept my eyes downcast, my movements small and efficient, trying to be nothing more than a shadow with a pitcher. My gaze was fixed on the scuffed toes of my leather slippers, a universe of worn leather and cold stone that was safer than the world of judging eyes above. "More wine, girl." The voice was sharp, dismissive. It belonged to Cyrilda, Lord Valerius's chosen mate, a she-wolf with hair the color of polished mahogany and a cruel curve to her lips. She sat beside him, a perfect picture of pack nobility. I moved forward without a word, my hands trembling slightly as I lifted the heavy earthenware pitcher. My reflection was a distorted, ghostly smear on its glazed surface. I could feel Valerius's gaze on me, cold and heavy as a tombstone. He had not spoken a single word to me since the rejection ceremony 5 years ago, but his silence was louder than any shout. It screamed my unworthiness into every corner of my life. He had stood before the entire pack, his face a mask of disgust. I, Valerius of the House of Thriven, reject Lysandra as my mate. His voice had boomed, each word a hammer blow against the fragile shield of my hope. The moon goddess has erred. I will not be shackled to a weak, cursed omen. I will not have my bloodline tainted by this ghost. The memory was a phantom limb, always aching. I finished pouring Cyrilda's wine, my movements jerky. As I turned to leave, her foot shot out, catching my ankle. It was a casual, thoughtless act of cruelty, as easy for her as breathing. The pitcher slipped from my grasp, time seeming to slow as it tumbled through the air. It crashed against the stone floor, shattering into 100 pieces and splashing dark red wine across the pristine hem of a guest's cloak. A collective gasp went through the nearby tables. My blood ran cold, colder even than usual. I had not just made a mess. I had accosted a guest, an alpha guest, judging by the sheer wave of power that rolled off him even as he sat perfectly still. My head snapped up against my will, and for the first time, I looked at the man. He was not from our territory. His scent was foreign, a wild, heady mix of pine, ancient earth, and something else. Something that felt like ozone before a lightning strike. He was immense, his shoulders broad enough to block out the firelight behind him, and his hair was as black as a starless midnight. But it was his eyes that held me captive. They were silver, not the pale, washed-out silver of a cloudy day, but the brilliant, molten silver of a freshly forged sword. And they were fixed on me. Panic, sharp and absolute, clawed its way up my throat. I dropped to my knees, ignoring the sting as shards of pottery dug into my skin. "Forgive me, Alpha," I whispered, my voice hoarse with terror. "It was my clumsiness. I am so sorry. I will accept any punishment." I began frantically trying to gather the larger pieces, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold them. "Leave it," a voice commanded. It was deep, resonant, and held an authority that silenced the entire hall. The voice belonged to the silver-eyed alpha. He had not moved, yet the power in that single command was absolute. Lord Valerius finally spoke, his tone laced with performative apology and underlying fury at my incompetence. 1,000 apologies, Your Majesty. The girl is an Omega, a clumsy, worthless creature. She will be dealt with most severely. I will have her whipped immediately. Your Majesty? The title barely registered through the fog of my fear. All I knew was the familiar promise of pain. The whip was a common recourse for my mistakes. You will do nothing of the sort, the silver-eyed king said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. He still had not looked at Valerius. His molten gaze remained locked on me, huddled on the floor. It was not her fault. I saw your mate trip her. The silence that followed was deafening. Cyrilda paled, her beautiful face twisting into a mask of outrage and fear. Valerius looked as if he had been struck. To be contradicted so flatly, so publicly, by a visiting king was an unthinkable insult. Stand up, little one, the king said, his voice softening just for me. It was so unexpected, that sliver of kindness, that it felt like a physical touch. Trembling, I pushed myself to my feet, wincing as a piece of the pitcher dislodged from my knee, leaving a smear of blood on my drab tunic. The king's eyes flickered down to the injury, and a strange expression crossed his face. For a fleeting moment, the raw power emanating from him was tinged with something else, something I could not name. He stood, and the entire hall seemed to shrink around his towering frame. He was King Theron, the Shadow Wolf King, ruler of the vast northern territories. A legend, a myth made flesh, and I had just spilled wine all over him. He shrugged off his magnificent cloak, the one I had ruined, and let it fall to the floor in a heap of dark fur and crimson stain. He took a step toward me, and I flinched back, expecting a blow. Instead, he simply looked at me, his silver eyes searching my face. It was the first time anyone of high rank had ever truly looked at me, not through me. He saw the white hair I tried to hide under my cap, the pale skin, the trembling of my hands. But in his gaze, I did not see disgust. I saw a curiosity. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards and up into my very soul. "Lysandra," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He nodded slowly. "Lysandra." He said my name as if it were a word of power, not a mark of shame. He then turned his gaze upon Lord Valerius, and the temperature in the hall plummeted. "Your hospitality is lacking, Lord Valerius. You value appearances over truth, and cruelty over justice. You would punish the victim to save your own face. This does not speak well of your leadership." Without another word, he turned and strode from the great hall. His guards, massive warriors who had been standing like stone sentinels by the doors, fell into step behind him. The feast was ruined. The silence he left in his wake was filled with 1,000 unspoken threats and the suffocating weight of my pack's humiliation. And all of it, I knew, would be laid at my feet. Later that night, the cold was my only comfort. Magra, the head cook and a staunch ally of Cyrilda, had made sure my punishment was swift, even if the king had forbidden a whipping. I was locked out of the servants' quarters, banished to the bitter cold of the courtyard with nothing but my thin tunic for warmth. My dinner had been the heel of a stale loaf of bread thrown at my head. The chill was a familiar pain, a predictable agony in a life defined by it. I huddled in the lee of the old smokehouse, trying to find a corner where the wind's biting teeth could not find me. Snow began to fall, thick, wet flakes that clung to my white hair and melted on my too pale skin. I was a creature of winter, slowly being reclaimed by it. Death felt less like a terror and more like a gentle release, a final melting into the endless white. Perhaps Valerius was right. I was a ghost, and it was time I faded completely. It was then that I heard it. A low, pained sound, half whine, half growl, carried on the wind from the edge of the woods that bordered the castle grounds. My first instinct was fear. Rogues were common this close to the unsettled lands, and I was defenseless. But the sound came again, and it was not the snarl of a predator. It was the sound of pure agony. Something inside me, some deeply buried instinct I thought had been beaten into submission long ago, stirred. It was the Omega's curse, to feel the pain of the pack, even a pack that did not want you. Against all reason, against every instinct for self-preservation, I found myself moving toward the sound. I pushed through the snow-laden branches of the fir trees, the darkness of the forest absolute. The sound led me to a small clearing, and what I saw there stole the breath from my lungs. A wolf lay crumpled in the snow, a creature of impossible size and midnight fur. It was enormous, larger than any wolf I had ever seen, its black coat a stark slash against the pristine white. A pool of dark blood was melting the snow around its flank, steaming in the frigid air. As I drew closer, the metallic, acrid scent of silver hit my nose. A silver-tipped arrow was buried deep in its side. An assassination attempt. No rogue used silver. It was too expensive. This was the work of a rival, a political enemy. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was a high-ranking wolf, and I was a nobody. I should run. I should hide and pretend I saw nothing. But I couldn't. The wolf let out another soft whine, and its great head lifted, its eyes finding mine in the gloom. They were silver, molten, brilliant silver, glowing with pain and fading power. It was him, King Theron. His wolf form was a magnificent terror, a being of pure shadow and strength, now brought low. He must have been ambushed, on his way from the hall. All thoughts of my own safety vanished, replaced by a fierce, inexplicable urge to help. He had spoken for me. He had shown me a flicker of kindness no one else ever had. I could not leave him here to die. "It's all right," I whispered, my own voice sounding thin and strange in the silent woods. "I'm here. I'll help you." I knelt beside him, my hands hovering over the terrible wound. The silver was poison, burning him from the inside out. It had to be removed. Gritting my teeth, I gripped the shaft of the arrow. The wolf, the king, let out a low growl, a reflex of pain. "I know," I soothed, my voice trembling. "I know it hurts. Just hold on." I poured all my will into my hands and pulled. The arrow was barbed, and it resisted, tearing flesh as it came. The king convulsed, a wave of agony shuddering through his massive frame, but he did not snap at me. With a final, sickening wrench, the arrow came free. Blood, black in the moonlight, gushed from the wound. I pressed my hands against it, but it was not enough. I tore a long strip from the hem of my already ragged tunic and folded it into a thick pad, pressing it firmly into the wound. The wolf's breathing was shallow, his life fading with every passing second. "No," I whispered, tears freezing on my cheeks. "You can't die. You were kind to me." Desperate, I did the only other thing I could think of. I lay down in the snow beside him, pressing my small, frail body against his immense one, trying to share my meager warmth. I wrapped my arms around his neck, burying my face in his thick, dark fur. It smelled of pine and power even now. And as we lay there, a dying king and a ghost of a girl, I began to talk. I confessed everything to the great, wounded animal in my arms, the words spilling out of me in a torrent of pain and loneliness. "They call me a curse," I whispered into his fur. "My whole life I've been nothing. Just a mistake. My mate, he looked at me like I was something he'd scraped off his boot. He said I would taint his bloodline. Sometimes I think he was right. I am broken. There's a piece of me that's just missing, a hole where my worth should be." I talked for what felt like hours, my voice growing hoarse. I told him about my parents, lost to a rogue attack when I was a pup. I told him about the taunts, the beatings, the endless grinding loneliness. I poured all the poison out of my soul and into the quiet of the winter forest. The great wolf did not move, but his breathing seemed to steady, his silver eyes closing as if in slumber. I must have drifted off, lulled by the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest, my own body succumbing to the cold I had tried to fight for so long. My last conscious thought was that it was not such a bad way to go, curled up against the only creature who had ever made me feel seen, even if it was just for a moment. I awoke to shouting. My body was stiff and numb, my limbs heavy as lead. For a moment I was disoriented, thinking I was back in my miserable cot in the servants' barracks. But the air was too sharp, too cold, and the ground beneath me was unforgivingly hard. I was in a small, dilapidated woodshed, the scent of old sawdust and damp earth filling my nose. Panic flared as I remembered. The wolf. The king. I scrambled to sit up, my eyes wide. He was gone. The spot beside me on the rough wooden floor was empty. Had I dreamed it all? Was the blood on my tunic just from my own fall in the great hall? The shouting grew louder, closer. "Spread out! Check every outbuilding! His Majesty's scent trail ends here." The shed door burst open, flooding the small space with the gray light of dawn. Framed in the doorway were two colossal warriors, clad in black leather armor trimmed with silver. They were the king's guards. Their eyes, hard as flint, swept the shed and landed on me. I froze, a trapped animal. They were looking for their king, and they had found me, a worthless Omega, covered in what was probably his blood. They would think I was responsible for his disappearance. They would think I was one of the assassins. My life, already so fragile, was over. "There's a she-wolf in here, Beta Gideon," one of the guards called over his shoulder. A third man appeared in the doorway, and the other two stepped back respectfully. This one was older, his black hair streaked with gray at the temples, and a jagged scar ran from his eyebrow to his jaw. His eyes held a weary intelligence and a formidable authority. This was the king's Beta. He took one look at me, at my white hair and terrified expression, and then his gaze fell to the floor beside me. There, half hidden in the straw, was the silver-tipped arrow. His eyes narrowed. "Seize her," he commanded, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Before the guards could move, another voice spoke from the shadows in the corner of the shed. "That will not be necessary, Gideon." My head whipped around. A figure emerged from the darkness, and my heart stopped. It was King Theron. He was no longer a wolf, but a man. He was bare-chested despite the cold, his skin pale in the dim light. A makeshift bandage, the strip of cloth from my own tunic, was tied tightly around his ribs, stained a dark crimson. He looked tired, but he was alive, and he was looking right at me. His guards and his Beta immediately dropped to one knee, their heads bowed. "Your Majesty," Beta Gideon said, his voice thick with relief. "We feared the worst. The assassins, they are dealt with," Theron said, his voice a low rasp. He did not take his eyes off me. "They thought a silver arrow would be enough to fell me, and it might have been, had I been alone." Gideon's gaze flickered from his king to me, and a flicker of understanding dawned in his scarred face. "The girl, she helped you?" "She did more than help," Theron corrected him softly. "She saved my life." He took a step toward me, and I shrank back, pulling my knees to my chest. This was all too much. Kings and Betas and assassins. I was so far out of my depth I was drowning. "I heard everything you said last night," he continued, his voice gentle. He knelt in front of me, bringing his silver eyes level with mine. The sheer power radiating from him was overwhelming, but it was tempered with a strange tenderness that I had never experienced before. Every word, my face burned with shame. I had poured out all my pathetic secrets to him, thinking he was just an animal. He knew. He knew how broken I was, how rejected, how utterly worthless. "Please, Your Majesty," I stammered, my eyes filling with tears. "I didn't know it was you. I thought you were just a wolf. I'm nobody. Just an Omega. Please, don't punish me for my words." He reached out and I flinched, but his hand was surprisingly gentle as he brushed a stray strand of white and hair from my face. A jolt, like a spark of lightning, shot through me at his touch. It was warm and electric, chasing away a fraction of the bone-deep cold that always clung to me. My wolf, a creature so dormant I sometimes forgot she existed, stirred within me for the first time in years, whining softly. King Theron's silver eyes widened, their molten depths swirling with an emotion so intense it made me gasp. The air between us grew thick, charged with an energy I could feel crackling on my skin. He inhaled sharply, his gaze fixed on mine, and then he whispered a single word, a word that shattered my entire world and rebuilt it in the space of a heartbeat. "Mate." The word hung in the air, a note of impossible truth. It vibrated through me, a deep, resonant chord that my very soul recognized. A bond, brilliant and golden and terrifying, slammed into place between us, a connection so profound it stole the air from my lungs. It was a feeling of coming home to a place I had never been, of finding a piece of myself I never knew was missing. It was beautiful, and it was horrifying. I shook my head, tearing my gaze from his. "No," I whispered, the denial a raw, desperate sound. "No, you're mistaken. It's not possible. The moon goddess does not make mistakes," he said, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. The golden bond pulsed between us, a living thing, and it terrified me. "But I am a mistake," I cried, the words tumbling out of me in a rush of panicked self-loathing. "Look at me. I'm an albino, a bad omen. My wolf is weak, small. Lord Valerius, my first mate, he rejected me. He said I was a curse. He's right. I'm broken. I'm worthless. I can't be your mate. You're a king. You need a strong Luna, a perfect she-wolf with a powerful lineage, not me." My voice broke on a sob. All the years of pain and humiliation were wrapped up in that single, desperate plea. I was trying to save him from me, from the taint of my existence. Theron listened to my frantic denials, his expression unreadable. When I finally fell silent, choking on my own tears, he reached out and gently tilted my chin up, forcing me to meet his gaze. The tenderness was gone, replaced by an unyielding certainty that was more powerful than any physical force. "They told you that you were a curse because your fur and hair are the color of the moon," he said, his voice low and intense. "I say you are blessed. They told you that you were weak, but I saw you face down your fear to help a creature in pain. I felt your strength as you pulled silver from my flesh. I felt your warmth as you shielded me from the cold, giving me your own life force when you had so little to spare." He leaned closer, his forehead almost touching mine. "You are not broken, Lysandra. You were shattered by fools who could not recognize a diamond because they were too busy admiring rocks. Your compassion is not weakness. It is the greatest strength a ruler can possess. Everything they discarded you for is everything I have been searching for my entire life." His words were a balm on wounds I didn't even know were still bleeding. I stared at him, my mind reeling. Could it be true? Could everything I believed about myself be wrong? Behind him, Beta Gideon and the guards remained kneeling, their faces carefully blank, but I could feel their shock. The legendary Shadow Wolf King, a man who had not taken a mate for over a century, had just found her, and she was me, a rejected albino Omega. At that moment, a commotion from outside the shed drew our attention. Lord Valerius, flanked by several of his own warriors, strode into view. His face was a thunderous mask of fury. "King Theron," he began, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "What is the meaning of this? Your guards are tearing my castle apart. And what are you doing in this hovel with her?" His eyes landed on me, and his lip curled in the ploss, familiar sneer that had haunted my nightmares for years. "Have you lost your senses? This is the Omega who disgraced my hall last night. She is nothing." Theron rose to his full, intimidating height, placing himself between me and Valerius. The protective gesture was so instinctive, so absolute, that it sent another tremor through the new bond connecting us. "You are blind, Valerius." Theron's voice was dangerously quiet, a predator's calm before the strike. "You speak of disgrace, yet you allowed assassins to walk freely in your own territory. You speak of worth, yet you cast aside the greatest treasure the goddess could ever bestow." He turned his head slightly, his silver eyes finding mine over his shoulder. And then, in a voice that boomed across the courtyard, clear and irrefutable for all to hear, he made his declaration. "This nothing, this Omega you so foolishly threw away is Lysandra, my fated mate, and she will be your queen." The world tilted on its axis. Valerius's jaw dropped, his handsome face contorting into a mask of utter disbelief and horror. The color drained from his skin, leaving him looking as pale as I was. His gaze darted from the king's resolute face to my own, as if seeing me for the very first time. And in his eyes, for the first time, I saw not contempt, but fear. It was a small, petty thing, but it felt like the first ray of sunshine after a decade of winter. The journey to King Theron's kingdom was a blur. I was swept up by his guards, wrapped in a thick, fur-lined cloak that smelled of him pine and earth and lightning, and placed on a horse before I could fully process what had happened. I rode with Theron, seated in front of him, his strong arms a secure cage around me. His body was a furnace against my back, a constant, solid presence that was both terrifying and deeply comforting. The bond between us hummed, a low, constant thrum of awareness that made my skin tingle. His palace was not a palace at all. It was a fortress carved from the heart of a mountain, a breathtaking structure of dark, gleaming stone and towering spires that seemed to pierce the very clouds. It was formidable and wild, a perfect reflection of the king who ruled it. The moment we passed through the great gates, I felt a sense of belonging so profound it made me dizzy. The land itself seemed to recognize me, to welcome me. Inside, I was led through halls of polished obsidian and silver inlay. The air was warm. The staff who greeted us were respectful, their eyes wide with curiosity but devoid of the malice I was so accustomed to. I was shown to a suite of rooms that was larger than the entire servants' wing of Black Moon Castle. A fire crackled in the hearth. A bed was piled high with soft furs, and a steaming bath filled with scented oils awaited me. It was all too much. The luxury, the kindness, the sheer, overwhelming reality of my new situation. After the servants left, I sank onto the presence, an edge of the plush bed, and finally allowed myself to tremble. I was a queen, the mate of the most powerful alpha on the continent. It felt like a dream, a cruel jest the goddess was playing on me. Any moment, I expected to wake up, cold and alone in the smokehouse. A gentle knock sounded at the door. "Lysandra, may I come in?" It was Theron. I couldn't find my voice, so I just whispered, "Yes." He entered, carrying a tray laden with food, hot stew, fresh bread, and a mug of mulled cider. He had changed into a simple black tunic and trousers, and the bandage around his ribs was fresh and white. The sight of him, so powerful yet so considerate, made my heart ache with a confusing mix of fear and a strange budding hope. "You must be hungry," he said, placing the tray on a small table near the fire. He didn't press, didn't demand I eat. He simply made the offer, and then stood by the window, gazing out at the snow-swept mountains, giving me space. "Why?" The word escaped me, small and fragile. He turned to face me, his silver eyes soft. "Why, what, little one? Why are you being so kind to me? Why aren't you forcing the bond? Why aren't you angry that your mate is me?" He crossed the room in 2 long strides and knelt before me again, taking my hands in his. His were large and calloused, but his touch was incredibly gentle. "I would never force you into anything, Lysandra. The bond is a gift, not a chain. It will be your choice, and only your choice, to accept it. And as for being angry," he shook his head, a small, sad smile touching his lips. "I have waited over 100 years for you. I have ruled alone, grown weary of the silence in my own halls, and dreamed of a mate who was strong not just in body but in spirit. I dreamed of a queen whose heart was kind. To be angry would be to curse the greatest gift I have ever been given." His sincerity was a physical force, chipping away at the icy walls I had built around my heart. I looked into his eyes and saw no deceit, no pity, only a deep, unwavering conviction. But the voice of Valerius was still a venomous whisper in my mind. "You are a curse. You will taint him. He will realize his mistake and cast you aside, just like I did." Over the next few days, Theron was true to his word. He was patient. He was a constant, steady presence in my new life. He would invite me to walk with him in the sheltered palace gardens, where strange, resilient flowers bloomed even in the heart of winter. He took me to his vast library, a place of quiet reverence filled with the knowledge of generations. He would sit with me at meals, telling me stories of his lands and his people, and more importantly, he would listen. He asked for my opinions, valued my thoughts, and treated me not as a possession, but as an equal. Slowly, tentatively, a part of me began to heal. The servants treated me with a deference that slowly morphed into genuine warmth as they saw their king's devotion. I was given beautiful clothes, soft tunics of deep blue and silver, that made my pale features seem ethereal rather than sickly. For the first time in my life, when I caught my reflection, I didn't immediately look away in shame, but the fear remained, a coiled serpent in my gut. Every night, I would wake from nightmares of Valerius's sneering face, his words of rejection echoing in the dark. I was terrified that this was all a fragile fantasy. What if Theron grew tired of my weakness? What if his pack refused to accept a flawed Omega as their Luna? The bond pulled at me, a constant, tempting warmth, but I was too afraid to reach for it. I was so used to being broken that the idea of being whole felt like a lie. One evening, Theron found me in the library, curled up in a large armchair, staring into the fire. I had been lost in my thoughts, wrestling with the same old demons. "You are far away tonight," he said softly, taking the chair opposite mine. "I'm sorry," I said automatically. "I'm not very good company." "You are the only company I desire," he replied simply. "Tell me what troubles you, Lysandra. Let me help you fight your ghosts." Tears welled in my eyes. No one had ever offered to help me before. "I'm scared," I confessed, my voice thick. "I'm so scared that you will wake up one day and see what Valerius saw. That you'll see the curse, the weakness, and you'll regret finding me. The fall from this height. I don't think I would survive it." Theron's expression grew hard, not with anger at me, but at the one who had hurt me so deeply. Valerius is a fool who traded the moon for a candle's flame because it was closer to his hand. What he saw was a reflection of his own shallow soul, not your reality. I will spend the rest of my life proving to you how wrong he was, if that's what it takes. He leaned forward, his silver eyes blazing with an intensity that burned away the shadows in the room. "You are not a curse, Lysandra. You are my destiny, and I will not let the echoes of a lesser man's cruelty dictate our future. The choice is still yours, but know this, I am not going anywhere." His words settled in my heart, a heavy, warm stone of truth. For the first time, a flicker of genuine hope ignited within me. Maybe, just maybe, he was right. Maybe I wasn't broken. Maybe I was just waiting for the right person to see the value in my pieces. A week later, Beta Gideon entered the library where I was spending most of my time. His scarred face was grim. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing his head to me, a gesture that still felt strange. "A delegation has arrived from the Black Moon Pack. Lord Valerius is with them. They have come to formally answer for the assassination attempt and to beg for your mercy." The blood drained from my face. Valerius. Here. In this place that had become my sanctuary. The coiled serpent of fear in my stomach woke and struck, flooding my veins with ice. My breath hitched, and the walls of the library seemed to close in. I wanted to run, to hide, to become the ghost they always said I was. Theron entered right behind his Beta, his senses surely having alerted him to my distress. He saw the terror on my face and was at my side in an instant. His hand rested on my shoulder, a warm, grounding weight. "You do not have to see them," he said, his voice a low growl. "I will send them away." I looked up at him, at the fierce protectiveness in his silver eyes, and something inside me shifted. He had been fighting my battles for me. He had been my shield, but a queen could not hide forever. If I was ever to truly heal, I had to face the ghost that haunted me. "No," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "No, I will be there." Theron searched my face, and a slow, proud smile touched his lips. "As you wish, my queen." The throne room was an imposing chamber of black marble and silver. Theron sat upon a massive throne carved from the heart of a single, colossal obsidian stone. I stood on the dais beside him, not behind him, a position of honor and equality that did not go unnoticed by his court, who had assembled to witness the proceedings. My hands were clammy, and my heart hammered against my ribs, but Theron's presence beside me was a fortress wall. Lord Valerius and his delegation were led in. They looked diminished in the vast hall, their finery seeming cheap and garish against the stark elegance of Theron's court. Valerius's eyes immediately found me, and a flicker of his old arrogance crossed his face before being replaced by a calculated expression of humility. Cyrilda was with him, her face pale and pinched. Valerius bowed low, but not low enough. "King Theron," he began, his voice smooth as oiled leather, "we come to offer our deepest apologies for the unfortunate incident in our territory. The assassins have been caught and dealt with. We throw ourselves on your mercy." He then straightened, and his gaze slid to me, dripping with false magnanimity. "And we have come to retrieve our lost Omega. Clearly, you have taken her in as a ward out of some misplaced sense of pity. We will relieve you of the burden. She can return to her duties in our kitchens, where she belongs." A deathly silence fell over the throne room. He had not just insulted me. He had insulted the king's choice, the king's judgment, in front of his entire court. He had called the future queen a burden. It was a fatal miscalculation, born of a lifetime of believing I was less than nothing. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. A wave of pure, unadulterated power rolled off Theron, so immense and oppressive that it felt like the mountain itself was about to collapse on us. A low, guttural growl rumbled in his chest, a sound that promised violence and ruin. Valerius and his entire delegation were forced to their knees by the sheer pressure of Theron's alpha command. They choked and gasped, their faces contorting in pain and terror. Cyrilda began to weep openly. Theron rose slowly from his throne, every movement filled with lethal grace. He descended the dais and stopped directly in front of the kneeling Valerius, towering over him like an executioner. "You dare." Theron's voice was a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a shard of glass. "You dare to stand in my hall and call my mate, my queen, a burden? You speak of where she belongs?" He crouched down, bringing his face level with Valerius's. "Let me tell you about the burden you cast aside. While you were feasting and preening, she was in the forest, in the freezing cold, pulling your poisoned silver from my body. She used strips of her own clothing to bind my wounds. She shielded me with her own body, giving me her warmth when she herself was freezing to death. She showed more courage, more loyalty, and more strength in one night than you have displayed in your entire pathetic life." Theron's voice rose, filling the vast hall, each word a hammer blow of condemnation. "You looked at the moon and saw only a pale rock. You are a fool, Valerius, a short-sighted, arrogant fool, who is unworthy to even breathe the same air as her. She does not belong in your kitchens. She belongs on this throne, beside me, where she will rule over lands you can only dream of. You had a diamond in your hand, and you threw it into the mud because you were too blind to see it shine." He straightened up, his power still pressing down on them. "You will address her as your majesty, and you will beg her for mercy, for it is her forgiveness you require, not mine. The slight against me, I can overlook, but the slight against her, that I will not." All eyes in the hall turned to me. Valerius, trembling on the floor, lifted his head, his face a mess of sweat and terror. He looked at me, truly looked at me, and saw not the ghost Omega, but the woman who held his fate in her hands. Watching him grovel, seeing the man who had shattered my world brought so low, I did not feel the triumph I expected. I felt a strange sort of pity. He was small. His cruelty was born of his own weakness and insecurity. Theron's defense of me, his unwavering belief in my worth, had already healed the wounds Valerius had inflicted. The man before me was nothing more than a bad memory. Tears streamed down my face, but they were not tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of release. A dam inside me had broken, washing away all the pain, all the shame, all the years of feeling worthless. In its place was a quiet, unshakable strength. I finally saw myself the way Theron saw me. I took a deep breath and looked down at the man who had rejected me. "Your life is your own, Lord Valerius," I said, my voice clear and steady, ringing with an authority I never knew I possessed. "Your punishment will be to live with the knowledge of what you threw away. Now go. I never want to see your face again." I had spoken. Theron released his hold, and Valerius and his delegation scrambled to their feet, bowing hastily before practically fleeing the throne room in utter humiliation. The court erupted in a roar of approval. Theron turned to me, his silver eyes shining with pride and love. He took my hand and raised it to his lips. "My queen," he murmured, for all to hear. And in that moment, standing beside him, I finally felt like one. That night, the palace was quiet. The confrontation had settled something deep within me, silencing the last of the venomous whispers from my past. I stood on the balcony of my chambers, looking out at the endless expanse of snow-covered peaks under a sky brilliant with stars. The cold air felt clean, invigorating, no longer a threat but a promise of clarity. The door opened and closed softly behind me. I didn't need to turn to know it was Theron. The bond between us was a living warmth, a constant song in my blood. He came to stand beside me, his presence a solid comfort in the vastness of the night. "You were magnificent today," he said, his voice a low rumble. I turned to face him, the moonlight catching in my white hair, turning it to spun silver. "It was you," I said softly. You gave me the strength. No, Lysandra, he corrected gently, cupping my face in his large, warm hands. That strength was always yours. I just held up a mirror so you could finally see it for yourself. I looked into his beautiful, molten, silver eyes, and I saw my future reflected there. A future of love, of respect, of shared power. A future where I was not a ghost, but a beacon. The fear was gone, replaced by a certainty as deep and solid as the mountain beneath our feet. I choose you, Theron, I whispered, the words coming not just from my mouth but from the very core of my soul. I accept the bond. I accept you. I want to be your mate, your queen, in every way. A look of profound relief and radiant joy transformed his face. It was the look of a man who had finally found his way home after a long and lonely journey. He lowered his head slowly, giving me every chance to pull away. I did not. I leaned into him, rising on my toes to meet him. His lips met mine, and the world exploded into light and sensation. The kiss was not gentle. It was a desperate, hungry claiming, a raw expression of a century of longing unleashed. It was fire and lightning, ice and warmth, a cataclysmic collision of two souls finally finding their other half. The bond between us flared, no longer a gentle hum but a roaring inferno, sealing us together, body and soul, for eternity. It was not a breaking, but a mending. Every shattered piece of me clicked into place, forged anew in the heat of his love, creating something stronger and more beautiful than I had ever been before. It felt like coming home. Our mating ceremony was held a month later, at the peak of the Castabulai Flavs, winter solstice, under the full, brilliant light of the moon that I had once believed had cursed me. I stood beside Theron on the highest peak of his mountain fortress, wrapped in a ceremonial cloak of white wolf fur that shimmered like freshly fallen snow. I was no longer the pale, shrinking Omega. I was Lysandra, the moon queen of the Shadow Wolf Pack, and my supposed flaws were now celebrated as sacred marks of the goddess's favor. My past was not forgotten, but it no longer had power over me. It was simply the long, winding road that had, against all odds, led me here. It was the pressure that had formed the diamond. Theron and I ruled side by side, his strength tempered by my compassion, my resilience bolstered by his unwavering love. My first decree as queen was the establishment of a sanctuary, a safe haven within our lands for any wolf cast out for being different, a place where the rejected could find a home and the broken could be made whole. I had been born in the cold, a creature of ice and isolation, destined, I thought, to fade into nothingness. But the love of a good king had not just saved me from the cold. He had shown me that the winter in my soul held its own fierce and quiet beauty. He had shown me that I was not a ghost to be pitied, but a queen to be revered. And together, we began our reign, a king of shadows and a queen of light, our love a legend whispered on the winter wind for all time.